Can Otto Scharmer's 4 levels of listening tell us anything about how prayer works, or how we can use prayer to build deeper connections with one another? Hello and welcome to this video on dealing with complexity at church. We're exploring frameworks and models and how they apply to the conversations we might have. This video looks at Otto Scharmer's Theory U levels of listening. In the same way the Greeks differentiate between different types of love because one word is too limiting, Otto Scharmer and his team make 4 distinctions to differentiate the ways we listen. These are habitual. This is listening with a closed mind and a narrow focus, confirming what I already know, reflecting the past rather than the present moment. Represented by this dot in a circle, Otto also refers to it as I in me. The next stage is ecosystem or factual listening. Listening opens up here to data and information and how to utilize it, comparing what I already know with what new information is available. Represented by this circle with a dot on the periphery, Otto also calls it I in it. The next stage is empathetic listening. Listening here crosses over a threshold, taking on more of Ian McGilchrist's right hemisphere take on the world. This is listening to another perspective through the other person's eyes, suspending my own judgments and presumptions. You're not trying to fix or advocate a certain position here, but you're trying to understand the other person. Represented by this circle with the dot leaving the parameter, it's also referred to as I in you. The next level of listening is called generative listening. This level of listening connects with something greater than the two subjects themselves, perhaps a better vision of the future that can be realized. When you come away from a conversation with a new way of seeing the world, a sense of clarity or a shift in how you perceive things, these are likely to have been generative conversations. They're harder to define as they're more embodied, they're more participatory. Perhaps it's best described as the listening you do when you look silently into the eyes of your partner and yet you're still communicating. Or when you're lost in nature, prayer, or meditation. Otto calls this I in now. We can see some of these levels of listening when we look again at the book of Job. We see that his 3 friends sit with him in silence for 7 days, reflecting on the situation that he's going through. They're trying to maybe conjure up some sort of generative, supportive experience. But it's interesting that when they open their mouths, they bring only a level 2 level of listening, where they just start presenting facts about the situation, about how God works in the world. But when God comes along, he takes Job on the generative tour of creation. He gives him an open experience of all that he's made. In order for the answers to arrive, God never directly answers Job's questions. He only shows him more things to experience. Let's go back over these levels again and add an interaction in. Something like the response you might give to someone saying, "How are you?" A level 1 interaction would be something like, yeah, good, same old, but better get along, I've got lots of things to do. This is a closed and habitual response. Each person's probably hoping the conversation won't last too long or get too deep, and neither tries to entertain such a conversation by moving quickly along. This is the majority of our conversations, and it's quite hard to get to the other levels of listening with most of the people that we interact with. But to get to level 2, you have to break through a ceiling of sorts in the conversation. That breakthrough comes by not conforming to the politeness of the social norm and interrupting that level 1 way of conversing and saying, actually, this is how I feel. You know what? I feel terrible today. And that breaks through that level 1 listening into level 2 because you have to start inquiring a bit more. Another example of breaking through would be to tell the person what you've been reading or thinking about, which engages in a deeper conversation. And this is the example I'll use for moving on to level 2. So level 2 listening could be, you know what, I've been reading this article and it actually says that like 79% of all plastic ends up in landfill. And if the other person is engaging in that level 2 kind of listening, they might be like, oh, really? That's interesting. But, I actually read that 91% of plastic isn't even recycled. And so both parties here begin to engage in listening to it. They're listening to some facts and they're offering up those facts to the other person for them to either accept or reject. It's in this place that you might get debate and kind of maybe even arguments that could happen if you disagree. But to get to level 3, you need another breakthrough. This happens when one person stops advocating for their own set of facts and actually begins to inquire as to why the other person might think a particular way. So continuing on from the level 2 scenario, somebody at a level 3 level of listening could then say something like, you know what, that's really interesting. What's been your experience looking into this? Why are you so interested? How does it make you feel when you come across these sorts of facts? So here you're looking to open up the conversation to not just be about data and facts and confirming or denying them, but you're looking to inquire into the other person's experience with the topic, the journey they've been on in exploring it. If we continue on again from level 3, somebody who's reaching a level 4 level of listening could say something like, this is such an important subject, and I've actually been practicing a few ways of reflecting deeply on a topic through just maintaining some silence, attending to it prayerfully with meditation, or by just going on a walk together. We'd like to give this a go. And again, there's a breakthrough here from level 3 to level 4. Because when you're attending to a person's experience, you perhaps find yourself wanting to coach them or mentor them. And again, you can break through and go into this kind of, you know what, I'm not needed as a coach or a mentor. I could just maybe use this opportunity to open up the space for prayer, for meditation, offer up to some sort of greater purpose, to God, the future, a sense of the whole, something that can be generated if you just allow space for that. Maybe allow space for that other person to get their thoughts together and become cognizant of what's going on. Getting to these levels of listening fluidly often requires practice, but it also requires inviting someone into that space to be listened to or to listen. Setting the intention clearly is really important since, as you can imagine, saying hello and then diving straight into a level 3, 4, or even a level 2 listening experience can be unusual socially. Entering into these levels of listening requires some vulnerability as well. It's very easy to get rejected and for people just to kind of ignore you and go, you know what, it's easy just to go and make a cup of tea. But when you offer up a level 3 or 4 listening experience, it's important to understand maybe some of what Brené Brown says, where she says that in our culture, we associate vulnerability with emotions we want to avoid, such as fear, shame, and uncertainty. Yet we too often lose sight of the fact that vulnerability is also the birthplace of joy, belonging, creativity, authenticity, and love. She also says, staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. So thinking about these levels of listening, how can we use them to connect more with each other? All the way up to that 4th level of listening, which I think in Christian culture is very much the place and purpose of prayer. When we offer to pray with somebody, sometimes without words, sometimes just to hold that space for them whilst they're in a troubling situation, is really powerful. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Our next video will look at Jordan Peterson's ideas around chaos and order and the hero's journey. There's an opportunity here to see how we can step into chaos and listen to what that experience is trying to tell us.